Hello everyone, this is Sarah. Have you ever heard about podcast? What is a podcast? Medium player or audio file? Before we are getting to know about true crime podcast, I'm going to give you some basic information about the podcast. Basically, it is a digital audio file which was developed in 2004. It's like a radio station. You can listen to it anywhere at any time. In your car, your mobile phone, even when you do your assignment and when you work. To make a podcast, the process can be divided into 3 steps. The first step is production. In this step, you are going to provide a story idea and research on it, and then write it down and report. The second step is packing, which means to put the audio track and music together. The final step is delivered it to your audience. And that's it, a podcast. You know what really impressed me about podcasts is that it's very different from traditional medium. With podcasts, you don't have to read. All you need to do, just listen. At the same time, you also can feel the emotion and emphasis from podcasts without watching, especially true crime podcasts. But be careful, true crime podcasts, you should pay all attention to focus on, because it is very different from others, which is about criminal case that genuinely happened. It is about the truth behind the scenes, and the truth has not been found yet. True crime podcast will tell you what exactly happened at the moment and why did it happen. It's like a documentary without accompanying image, but it will accompany with background music, radio recording, and interview. If you ask me why should you listen to true crime podcasts, what value they have, I'm going to say that all of stories are truly stories. The evil happens around us. What you just heard is the very beginning background music from Blood on the Tracks, as this podcast represents a boy down the railway. At the moment, listener will create a related version what's going on. This is an attractive part of audio stories, because listener can feel like they are in the crime scene, that experience what the parties were experiencing. Besides, there are a lot of interviews recorded with their families, friends, and other related people. In The Dark Reporter, Madeline Ba'ana states that there's an intimacy that is unique in audio, because you are getting to hear these people talk and you feel you are connected with them. You feel like they're talking to you, perhaps differently from the video. I totally agree with that, especially when podcaster mix in the tension of murder and music. The voice elicited a greater visceral response from the listeners. I have to mention that the true crime podcasts usually include unsolved crimes, unidentified crimes, or suspected wrongful convictions. According to this, it will give more emotions to listeners who wonder what exactly happened there and what is the truth. The stories will arouse their curiosity to listen to podcasts. Remember the Serial? Serial is an investigative journalism podcast hosted by Sarah Koenig, who narrates a true crime of the murder of young Korean-American girl, Emily, by her ex-boyfriend, Adana Syed. It happened in 1999. After 15 years, the podcaster Sarah Koenig provides the evidence with a true crime story for listeners. She checked the phone records, listened to all suspect interviews, and even talked to Syed. She tries to understand every detail of the case and provide the amazing true crime podcast ever for listeners. I think the value of true crime podcasts is not just because it's based on true crime. It also can be historical, since it's a material source for future investigation. After the podcast prepares so many details that people may not find yet at that time. It can provide some new clues and directions for police and detectives, and also is a great communication with listeners who may find critical evidence or essential clues, even though this possibility is very low. Another valuable point, I think, is prevention. Crime is happening every day, even around us. Be interested in understand why such a crime will be committed. Listeners can learn how to prevent it or survive from a crime, especially for women. We have to admit that in the most criminal case, most victims are always women. Therefore, it's not a bad thing to listen to more true crime podcasts, although it is quite cruel. So now I'm going to give a conclusion to the podcast for today. True crime podcast is getting more and more popular because there are so many valuable stuff in the true crime podcast. For example, it is very different from the traditional media. You'd have to read or watch in traditional media. But in the podcast, you just pay all attention to listening. Believe me, you will feel a stronger emotion in podcasts than watching or reading other media. Meanwhile, it's very historical, which can provide good material source for future investigation. And it's also a great way for people to prevent crimes. Thank you for listening. I hope you can enjoy it.